I'm Dragoljub Nesic. I'm running R&D at Verisec. And those of you who joined us last year will remember that I lamented over the lack of the possibility of using this or this to pay anywhere. And you will realize that this is still the case. So ICA to go, Central Station, endless queues because people buying a banana for 4 krona have to use a contact card, put it in, enter a PIN, get a receipt, and everything is happening while the train is slowly but surely pulling away from the platform. However, on the bright side, I did talk to a gentleman this morning from one of the banks who promised that this time, next year, it will be solved. We will have Apple Pay and Samsung Pay and all sorts of other HC and so on. So hopefully these queues in the photograph next year will disappear if you join us. But I won't be talking about that today. I have decided to take the liberty of an R&D director to share some of areas of the research we're doing, you know, the R and the R&D. I can't talk concrete exactly what we're doing, but I will give you a hint on some developments, and some of them might be scary for people who haven't heard about them before. The way to go about that is I'll have a glance 19 years back, and you'll see why. And then we'll talk about deep learning, connectivity, robotics, all 3 words I believe mentioned previously. Some combinations of those 3, and then we'll try to look in a crystal ball and predict the future, which is never a grateful task. So anybody remembers what happened in 1997, which is exactly 19 years ago? Any specific events that come to your mind? Yes, my son was born then, but that's not the one I was asking for. Let's start a few. That's when the 18 age limit was introduced for purchasing tobacco. Before that, underage kids could buy actually tobacco. So all of you could have done it, but your kids can't. Hong Kong was returned back to China. There was a huge debate about the first episode of Robinson being aired. And Robinson, if you remember, is the first reality show in Sweden. I don't think you can find anything else but reality shows on TV today. But it was a huge controversy about, is it okay to vote people out from shows and so on, and now it's common practice. Kyoto was signed, and the first humanly cloned mammal was born, a sheep called Dolly, and Steve Jobs returned to Apple. So that was like 19 years ago, seems like ages. Now 1997 was a special year because another event happened. It was the year that a computer for the very first time beat the then world master in chess, Garry Kasparov, by 3.5 to 2.5. So 6 games, and the best guy in the world lost. Now, at the beginning of this year, there was a similar competition where a Google creation called AlphaGo beat the today's master in Go 4-1. It was an obliteration. Go is a much more complex game than chess. On the surface, this is very similar. However, there are some profound differences that one needs to be aware. Deep Blue was a huge parallel computing machinery from IBM, which run specialized software. It could only play chess. And it did so by having a huge library of openings. So some humans were actually entering hundreds of thousands of games previously played with well-known first 15 to 20 moves in order to save computer the time to play the openings of the games. Then it used huge brute force machinery to evaluate possible moves. So if I play this, he plays that, I play this, he plays that, what happens? And do so for many moves ahead. And AlphaGo does something completely different. It uses machine learning. It actually didn't know it was playing Go for most, which is really bizarre. It was trained by human play, so it was fed 160,000 previous games and then tried to mimic what humans were doing in different situations. And finally, it was playing many, many games against other instances of itself. So you You can actually imagine two Gary Kasparovs playing against each other and learning. So you can pull hundreds and hundreds of AlphaGo machineries. They play against each other and learn through the time. Now, this does sound abstract. So I will show you a video of a similar neural network deep learning machinery learning to play an Atari game called The Wall. So just bear with me and watch what happens here. Hopefully we can... So not a very good player, right? This is like a kid playing and not really understanding how to hit the bricks. Slightly better, but not really there. Now it's getting the hang of it, right? So this is when the machine realizes, the way to beat this is to kick this ball behind the wall and do this. The holy grail of anybody ever playing Atari games. You obliterate the wall by kicking it from behind. So we don't have to watch the whole wall disappear. But the point here is that the only inputs to the machinery here are the pixels, the score, it knows what's good and what's bad, and the possibility to move this brick in the bottom. It actually, it's not like it learned to play chess or something. It is playing a video game where it knows the outcomes, and the process of learning is similar to that of kids. Now, some things I'd like you to think about is this machinery has no constraints in terms of volume or power consumption. If we want to make a bigger and more capable and smarter machinery, we will build a data center in Umeå, power it with everything coming from the rivers in the north of Sweden, and you can get an unlimited, no limits in terms of volume or power consumption. And secondly, it can actually play this game time after time after time and not get bored in terms of learning. I mean, any human playing 10 or 15 or 20 hours of The Wall will eventually go crazy or fall to sleep or die. The machine can continue doing that time after time after time without being bored. So it can perfect its skills much faster than we do. Now, if we look at mobile phones, these are the top-selling models 1997. And I know it sounds very strange. And the other thing is that none of the companies here, which were dominant at the time, are actually making phones today. Ericsson doesn't make phones, Motorola and Nokia, all gone. So the world has significantly changed in the 19 years since. Moreover, the best you could get, apart from having a conversation on those phones, was a dial-up. So you'd sort of connect to something, get 36K, and you're very happy because you're working remotely. The 97 was also the year when the first Wi-Fi standard was published. 802.11 was drafted, and then 11b ratified. Anybody remembers 11 megabits per second in your home was a miracle. It was created 2 years later. The Wi-Fi phrase was coined against things like Flang Speed and Dragonfly, which were the competitors for the name. And the first actually computer with a built-in Wi-Fi, the MacBook, was made. I challenge you to find a computing device that doesn't have Wi-Fi built in today. Because what we actually have in our pockets are super connected supercomputers. A while back, I compared an average mobile phone with the machinery that took men to the moon, and it was millions of times more capable in any kind of computing scenario. Maybe not as robust. It has loads of sensors. You know, the obvious thing, microphone, you need to talk. It's got a camera, you can turn it around, roll, pitch, acceleration, movement, position, fingerprint. You can attach external sensors like smartwatches, training gear, blood sugar, blood pressure, sweat sensors. Anything is getting interconnected into this one sensing platform. And this, everything is getting connected is actually the theme here, because we're very happy today to have most of Sweden covered with 3G, and that average is about 6 megabits per second. If you're lucky to live downtown Stockholm, you get 4G, which is about 15 megabits per second. Wi-Fi, if at your home, allows 300, and if you have that with a coaxial or a optical connection, you'll get a gigabit connection at home. But 5G is actually on its way. And academia in the UK has reported speeds of 1 terabyte per second point-to-point wirelessly. That is sort of unimaginable speed just a few years back. The general expectations of 5G when our colleagues in the telecom industry get there is 10 to 15 gigabits per second, which is many times more than you actually get in a home connection today. What we're seeing today is things converging in this thing. I would venture to the thought that it will not long be the case. The mobile phone is a historical artifact. Actually, connectivity, there's no reason why my button shirt cannot communicate with the rest of the world if we can solve the power problems. So the fact that everything is going through the mobile phone today need not remain so in the future. So that's connectivity and deep learning. Let's now have a venture into robotics. Robots, what do they do today? Well, they can do industrial work, or they can help people have fun. Now, this is an ABB industrial robot, and a couple of guys, and that's what robots do in their spare time. So when they're not making cars, they're actually having fun. But you will appreciate the power, the precision, and the capability of this machine. No human could toss this guy around anytime soon. Our CTO is actually planning to have one of these installed in our facility in Upplands Väsby. Now, what do these things do? They do kind of mundane, repetitive tasks that people don't want or cannot. Are dangerous, boring, require precision beyond what we can do. You cannot assemble an iPhone by hand. You need sort of robotic cameras which do micrometer precision to get it look nice and shiny. Or are too heavy. You couldn't toss a human like this around. They are very often stationary, don't move around, and they are generally programmed through some sort of sequential programming language. So you can program that robot to toss me around, but that's all it can do. It can continue that same movement without any intelligence or thought. So, in that respect, a little Lego Mindstorm is no different from an industrial robot. It's just the power and then the flexibility and then things like that. You need to do something new, you've got to reprogram it and retool it. And that is done through some kind of programming language, either with a keyboard or with graphical, but it's still programmed. But there's other things along the way. And this is a video about combining deep learning with a robot to teach him to make a pancake. All right? So this is pretty much how you would teach a child. All right? So there's no programming here. We're teaching a robot by showing him the movement. And then the robot practices. I don't think it's been very different for any of us in the room. We just wouldn't admit it. It's chuckle against the machine, but I remember a few pancakes flying around my kitchen at the time when I was 12, 13, 14. But just bear in mind that it doesn't get tired. It can do this time after time after time again until it perfects the skill. So 50 trials, and it can continue flipping this pancake for many weeks now without getting tired. There you go. So, so that was robotics. I'll venture now into autonomous driving, because it was mentioned previously. Why would you want a machine to drive? Because we humans are so good drivers. Well, generally machines don't drink, they don't get tired, they are not likely to show you a finger if you're irritating them. They are more realistic than humans in terms of calculating risks and probabilities. So if you need to estimate whether the vehicle coming from there is going to hit me if I pass, or can, like I said, machines are much better at that than we are. And there's two approaches to solving this autonomous driving problem. One is a deep blue approach. We build a machine that talks to everything else, has more sensors, more cameras, has vehicle-to-vehicle communication, vehicle-to-system communication, and generates huge amounts of data and requires gigantic amounts of processing. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who works at Huawei Research, and said it's impossible. The physical constraints of communication prohibit the capability of one car to talk to everybody else, and so on. But if you take the AlphaGo approach, it is like you can learn the car about patterns. It could do so in a safe, simulated environment, and it doesn't have to communicate to other cars. Now, this same person said, no way, humans are perfect drivers, for the most when they're sober. I beg to differ, and I'll show you why. This is actual motorway footage from a camera. And unless somebody with no programming skills programmed a computer, I don't think a machine would do this. Yep. Or, do this, which is, there's obviously a road closed, but what's it to change the rules a bit? There's another rule-bending experience. This stuff is just a few meters wrong. If you want to look at something on the motorway, what better than to stop in the fast lane and observe the surroundings? So generally, I don't think machines would do that. So anybody arguing that, and this is calculating risks in a slippery environment out of a tunnel, I would think that the machine would be slightly more conservative in terms of speed and risk assessment, and injuries and stopping and fogs and you name it. So when it comes to machine driving, I'll be the first one to probably say yes to that combination. Fair enough. So let's get into a completely different area now, once again. And we had robots, we had them learning, and we saw, where Daniel showed an example of a robot that looks humanoid, because we tend to like things like us. So if we make humanoid robots, the acceptance is likely to be higher. And furthermore, walking is probably the most superior way of getting around on uneven terrain. If everything is flat, then you can have wheels or whatever, or rubber bands, but walking is far superior in terms of that. And again, humanoid robots won't get bored at doing things. Now, you add the communication and the sensors into a robotic enclosure, and combine that with learning, and you can solve many problems which are very difficult today, like hospital and elderly care. If you think about it, taking care of elderly in hospitals or immobile patients is extremely difficult for humans. It's challenging, it's tiring. Or if you think about extinguishing fires in funny places where everything is burning, that's something that's hazardous for people, but that a machine that is trained to walk around with a hose and so on could solve much more easily. Now, I don't know how aware you are about the developments in robotic movement, but we are nowhere as far as you might think. This is Boston Dynamics, a small US startup. Uh, Promotional video, okay, so they probably selected the best footage of their walking robot. But on the other hand, it is walking on uneven terrain quite well. And there's no reason to believe that this cannot be improved further. But it's balancing. I mean, think of it. 20 years ago, this would have been very challenging. And, 10 pounds is not very heavy, but look at the agility and the movement of putting things around and adding a bit more power and so on. You can imagine this thing moving elderly patients in a hospital without difficulty. The next thing that pops up is that it's very difficult to get it agitated. So it can lift this box, great. But, if this happens, it doesn't really get upset. All right? So it's void of emotions. It will carry out its task of lifting this box despite this guy being very nasty. Yeah. Now this is also one of the drawbacks of machinery. It wants to lift this box no matter what. Now, sooner or later, if you add intelligence, it will realize that the most efficient way of lifting this box is actually whacking the human away and lifting it. And that is something that this human is not aware, that once this machine starts learning and realizing and understanding, combine its superior power with the possibility to remove obstacles, and you get a very, very powerful combination. Which brings us to a couple of questions that I'd like to raise with you. There's a discrepancy between laws and technology today. Just take driving. If an accident happens in a car that is autonomously driven, who is responsible? Is it the software? Is it the driver of car 1, driver of car 2? If a drunk driver collides with a machine, is it the machine's fault? Is it the drunk driver's fault? Those are areas that our colleagues in the legal space will have to resolve. Daniel mentioned this, a car killing the driver in order to save a bus with 50 kids. Is that good or bad? It depends on where you're sitting. Today, the driver will most likely try to protect themselves. Yes, there are examples in history where a driver decides to sacrifice himself for the greater good. But in most cases, we are programmed to try to avoid something the best we can, even if that causes a larger damage elsewhere. So machines can be too good at this, and the question is whether we're happy with it. In general, I think we are more willing to accept errors made by other people than we are by machines. There's always the thought that if a machine makes an error, yes, I can sue the company that produced the software, made the machine, and because it's their fault, whereas you wouldn't possibly sue the human. Another question here is that the technology does not discriminate in terms of two things. It's used for good and it's used for bad. So the good use of that robot moving a box is actually doing some firework or hospital work and so on. Put a gun in its hand, and suddenly it becomes a weapon, which I would consider most likely a bad use. Secondly, there's a huge difference between intended and unintended outcomes. And when I work with my development team, I usually say computers are very good at doing what you told them to rather than what you wanted them to do. It's kind of like a teenager. You tell them to do something and they will find an interpretation of that which is factually correct but utterly irritating because that was not what you meant. And you will realize that I had just recently 2 teenagers at home, so I'm familiar with that situation. Now, what happens when we get to Robocops? So machinery with guns created for good, to keep us safe and patrol the streets, and you've all seen the various incarnations of the RoboCop movies, and the good guys usually win there, but that doesn't necessarily have to be so. And then we get to the idea of sort of networked, autonomous, deep learning weapons, and that brings us to Skynet. For the movie literate, you'll remember the Terminator movies. But that is what Skynet, in theory, was. Self-aware learning machinery that took over the world and decided to eliminate the humans as unnecessary waste. Whether that's going to happen or not, I encourage you to do some reading. There's loads of it on the internet. It's very exciting. We are very deeply involved because there's security in all of these aspects that we're researching in how to facilitate the comms, the deep learning, and the robotic elements into the future. So this is where I venture into uncharted territory, 2035, which is today plus 19 years. WIPO, remember, this is the first place you've heard it, like wireless power. Everybody's talking about batteries today and problems with, phone batteries, car batteries, battery factories, waste of batteries. I venture that it won't be necessary. We will have wireless power. There is elements of that today. You could, with today's technology, charge the phone in my pocket by bouncing wireless signals across the room, which converge onto the mobile phone. Sounds crazy, but if you continue that development, there's no reason why you couldn't charge cars on the move, anything that requires power. Bandwidth limitations as we know them today will disappear. We'll probably be just bound by laws of physics rather than technology. Everything will be connected. Clothing, medical devices, home, transport, bits and pieces. We'll have robots everywhere. ANG stands for Artificial Narrow Intelligence. Actually, it should be ANI, sorry, rather than ANG. Narrow intelligence, so it's specific applications of artificial intelligence to solve concrete problems, navigation, solving chess play, and so very, very narrow things. General intelligence, very likely, so deep learning machinery that does things around and helps us, hopefully, do what we need to do in an easier and better way. Now, there is one problem with this prediction, which is the following image. By the way, this is excellent reading on artificial intelligence if you ever want to go there. And I think Johan was picking up on this. This is kind of an exponential curve. This is what it looks in mathematics. The growth accelerates over time. And when I was making these predictions about 19 years from now, I'm no better than any other human. I base it on my experience and the developments I've seen in the past 20 years. Now, this would be kind of the trajectory of the past 20 years. So if you take Nokia's 97 and kind of say, oh, well, I'll take that rate of growth in the next 19 years, this is where we'll end up. But that is not correct because today's rate is already faster. So the pace that technology is growing today is faster than it was over the past 19 years. So we're already in the accelerating part of the curve. So if I were to take that into account, I would have predicted something even more outrageous up there. But even that is wrong because over the next 19 years, the rate of acceleration will further increase with the exponential curve. So my correct prediction should have been here. The problem is nobody knows what that's going to look like. Predicting 19 years from now, things that I don't know about, and possibly things that machines, which become intelligent, can think of and create because they're so immensely more powerful than we are, is a difficult task. So that is a kind of a note I'd like to leave you with. Think about what is the growth going to be, and furthermore, what can you do today to jump on that wagon rather than thinking this is how it's always been and this is therefore what the future is going to look like. All right, that was from the R&D department of Verisec. Thank you.